LSU going into this season has really high expectations. They had a really big first year under Brian Kelly. I don't think anybody expected LSU to have the success that they had year one last year under him. And going into this year, there's a lot of optimism that LSU could once again win the SEC West and maybe win the SEC this year, be able to challenge and knock off Georgia for the SEC crown. But for Florida State, they have high expectations too. And if you were to ask me who has more hype going into this game, I gotta go with Florida State, man. Like, Florida State has pretty much been the talk of college football. All you hear is Jordan Travis for Heisman. You hear everything great being said about Mike Norvell and what he was able to accomplish with this team last year. But the expectations are sky high for Florida State. And honestly, this is the highest that the expectations have been for the Seminoles in a very long time. And let me tell you guys something. I think that this game is going to be a really big test and proving if FSU is going to be able to live up to the hype this year. If you were to ask me, JT, what team has more to prove in this game, I would have to say Florida State. You see, LSU could lose this game and still be perfectly fine when it comes to their chances of making it to the college football playoffs, because they play in the toughest conference in all of college football. So they're going to be able to make up for a loss here with how competitive and how difficult their schedule is going to be if they're able to win out. But if FSU takes a loss here, their playoff hopes take a dramatic hit really early. And yes, you do want to lose early into the season, but when FSU is playing the kind of schedule that they're playing this year, outside of LSU, their next biggest game would be against Clemson. So that would be a huge must-win game. And then they will probably have to hope that they could get a couple of other good teams on the schedule. Maybe Miami ends up being pretty good this year. They get ranked in the top 25 and you can beat them and win out if you suffer a loss in this game and still find a way to make an argument for why you deserve to be in the playoffs. But FSU, I don't really think that if they lose this game, people are going to be as high on them after as they are right now. I think that the narrative about FSU will quickly change with the loss in this game. You will have people calling this team overrated, overhyped, and I kind of would agree. Florida State fans feel like this team is good enough to be a contender for the college football playoffs. And this is the most talented FSU team that they've had in a very long time. You got a very good offensive line. You got Jordan Travis, one of the best QBs in America. You got an incredible group of receivers. Your defense is stacked. FSU, this team is good enough to compete for a national title. They currently are favored to win the ACC. And if Clemson ends up beating FSU and FSU loses this game also, how is that going to look on Mike Norvell? You know, that's going to kill a lot of the momentum that FSU has. Not just, coming into the season from the fan base, but maybe in recruiting. This is a big year for Mike Norvell. All of the prior years that Mike Norvell has been building this program up has led to the year 2023. This is the year where the Florida State Seminoles kind of have to make a run. And if you're an FSU fan listening to this right now, let me ask you something. If FSU loses to LSU and Clemson, how disappointed would you be? I would have to say that you would probably feel extremely disappointed, considering all the hype and optimism that was going in to this season around the FSU football program. Now, meanwhile, for LSU, like I said, if you lose this game, I don't really think the narrative about you really changes that much. I still think people are going to be really high on you. I think that this game kind of cements FSU and cements the hype that they had all offseason. Versus LSU, you kind of already proven yourself a little bit last year. Although some people may say last season was a fluke, you got to do it again for people to really believe that you're for real. But Brian Kelly is a really good coach. He is a proven head coach. He's an established head coach who's won every single where that he's been. So I think for LSU, the narrative won't change on them. But for Florida State, I don't really think that they're going to have a lot of media attention and people are going to be talking about them as much with the loss in this game, because a lot of people now only really care about, are you in the mix to make the college football playoffs? And if FSU takes an early loss here and then they lose to Clemson, I think you will quickly hear the FSU hype train quiet down tremendously. And what would that mean for Mike Norvell having to handle that kind of disappointment? Because with FSU having these kinds of expectations, to have two devastating losses to LSU potentially and Clemson, could that potentially alter FSU season? Could that be a situation that maybe loses the locker room? Now, when we break down this game, and we look at what these two teams have when it comes to a talent standpoint, I think that these are two programs that are pretty evenly matched. When you look at quarterback, you got two Heisman hopefuls, Jaden Daniels and Jordan Travis. Jaden Daniels was fantastic last year. We talk about what Bryce Young did for Alabama, how he carried the Crimson Tide on his back. Jaden Daniels carried LSU on his back under Brian Kelly in his first year. I mean, he was going off against Alabama, Ole Miss, Florida. He had some great performances in those games, especially with what he did on the ground. And LSU, are they going to give him better protection up front this season? Because last year, this offensive line and pass protection wasn't good. And when you're going against Florida State, who has one of the best defensive lines in all of college football, Fabian Lovett, Jared Verse, you need very good offensive line play. So LSU's offensive line, how improved is it going to be this year? We're going to find out that question, or the answer to that question, really early in this game, week 1. And also, LSU brought in a lot of cornerbacks via the transfer portal. You got Zai Alexander, who was playing for an FCS school, Southeast Louisiana. He was a 2-time all-conference selection. Last year, he had 3 picks and 4 pass breakups. He should be really good. And then you got Syracuse transfer Deuce Chestnut, who was one of the better cornerbacks in the ACC, and he was a 2-time all-ACC selection. And he also was a freshman All-American during his freshman season there. How are these cornerbacks going to do against FSU's receiving core? Because FSU has some dogs at receiver. I mean, they got Keon Coleman from Michigan State via the transfer portal, and then they got this 6'7", 240-pound behemoth at wide receiver named Johnny Wilson. Who the hell is going to cover that? How the hell do you cover that? This is somebody who's 6'7", 240, fam. This is something that you see on Madden and Create a Player. And Johnny Wilson, he had some issues with drops, but I think he should have that issue fixed this season, and he could be in for maybe a 1,200, 1,300 yard year. That's how good Johnny Wilson could be this season for FSU. So for the LSU secondary, how are they going to handle that? Because Johnny Wilson is a mismatch. The size is larger than life. You're not going to have too many cornerbacks that are going to have the length to match up with Johnny Wilson. And 2, his athleticism. I mean, this dude could easily go up and catch a 50-50 ball on you with ease with his size and frame. And he's really good at being able to box out defenders and make those kinds of big jump ball or big contested catches. Now, the LSU front 7 is going to be really interesting. The LSU front 7 has guys like Harold Perkins at linebacker, Mason Smith at defensive tackle, and they're going against FSU's offensive line that probably is the best that it's been in several years. They got some really good players on the defensive line of LSU. And I really like the addition of linebacker Omar Speights out of Oregon State. So how are they going to do when it comes to containing Jordan Travis? Jordan Travis is one of the most athletically gifted quarterbacks in all of college football. And Jaden Daniels is in the same conversation. But when Jordan Travis decides to tuck and run, he's a threat to take it to the house every single time. This dude is very elusive in the open field. He has very great speed. And for LSU, you're going to have to figure out a way to contain that. You got to figure out a way to make Jordan Travis beat you from inside of the pocket. Jaden Daniels, if you're FSU, you're looking at that new offensive line or the offensive line going into this game, and you're saying, okay, we want LSU to show us just how improved their O-line is this year. And if this offensive line for LSU struggles, it could be a very long afternoon for them. And we remember how this game went last year. It was a very competitive game and had a really crazy ending, and FSU pulled off the victory. But in this game, though, I don't think this game is going to come down to a situation where they got to kick a game-winning field goal to win the game. I think this game is either going to be won by a touchdown and maybe a comfortable margin by either LSU or FSU, or one of these teams is going to end up getting blown out. That's kind of how I feel that's going to go, because this is week 1 of the college football season. Neither one of these teams have played against anybody else other than themselves. And plus, anytime you're going into a game this big, week 1, there's a tendency where you can get a little bit rusty. You could get maybe sloppy with the football early, and maybe you get a slow start. So which team is going to be more prepared in this game? That's why I feel this game either could be won by a touchdown or more, or it could result in a blowout. Now, I don't know who could end up getting blown out, but I think that's the way this game could go. I think that LSU has a lot of very talented wide receivers, and FSU has a really talented secondary. You got one of the best safeties out of the transfer portal. You got a really good group of linebackers. I'm eager to see who's going to match up well with LSU's really good group of tight ends. And Jaheim Bell, he's a monster at tight end for Florida State. So there are a lot of similarities that these two teams have from a roster standpoint. But I think that the offensive line for LSU probably is the biggest question mark in this game. And for FSU, your biggest concern is probably going to be the backing of your secondary. I'm looking at FSU in this game, and I think that they have way more to prove than LSU. LSU, we already know what they're capable of. They made it to the SEC championship year 1 under Brian Kelly. And if they lose this game, people are still going to be high on them. But for Florida State, a loss in this game, I don't think everybody has the same positive tone about them after a loss like they do right now in the preseason right now. Everybody thinks that Florida State has a very good chance of not just making it to the ACC title game, but being able to knock off Clemson and returning to the college football playoffs. But if they lose this game, not only does their journey to make it back to the college football playoffs get even tougher, but it also kind of maybe loses a little bit of momentum that this team might have had that they built based on what they did near the tail end of last season when they got on that winning streak, and then they ended up winning that bowl game against Oklahoma and getting a 10-win season. You built a lot of momentum based on what you did during the second half of last year when you went on that winning streak. And with the loss this early into the season, that could maybe halt that momentum, and maybe FSU kind of comes down to earth a little bit. And then you'll have to beat Clemson. If you were to lose to Clemson and you go 0-2 against LSU and Clemson, imagine how devastated the locker room would be after all the hype, everything positive that's been said about Florida State, and then they end up putting up duds against their two biggest opponents this year. And if you're Mike Norvell, how would you be able to navigate this? And like I said, for LSU, I don't think it's as much pressure on them because they already kind of came out of nowhere last season. So even if they do lose this game, people are still going to be pretty high on them because it's LSU, and you're going to give them the benefit of a doubt because of Brian Kelly and because they play in the SEC. But people aren't going to have that same mindset and that same perspective when it comes to viewing FSU. There's been a lot of hype about Florida State going into this game, and I think that this is their prove-it game. And if they win this game, I think that the hype for FSU is going to be at an even higher level than what it is going into this season, because they're going to have another win over LSU, who a lot of people think can win the SEC West. And then if they can beat Clemson, then everybody's going to be talking about Florida State, and the hype is going to be at an all-time high, because if they can beat LSU and Clemson, then I think that that pretty much proves that Clemson is, no longer the king of the ACC, and it proves that Florida State is back on the level that they were nearly a decade ago when they first appeared in the inaugural college football playoffs. And that shows you that Mike Norvell's plan has been successful, and he's even rebuilt FSU faster than initially expected. I thought that this thing was going to take 5 to 6 years to rebuild. And if FSU ends up making it to the college football playoffs, do you know what that would mean for this program? That would mean that this program has returned to the top of the college football world, which would also elevate recruiting even further. But if FSU ends up, let's say they lose this game to LSU, and let's say they lose to Clemson, how would that affect recruiting? Would recruiting still have the same momentum? I just think that FSU has more to prove in this game than LSU. And I know Seminole fans are going to say, JT, you tripping, like both these teams have a lot to prove. Like, they do. And you can say that, and I wouldn't push back against that. But I just think with all the hype that Florida State has been getting this offseason, they got to show that they are for real. And this is probably the best team that they've had in years. And there's going to be a lot of guys who are going to be out of this program next year. You're going to have a lot of new faces. So you're going to have a lot of new guys coming in, and you're kind of going to have to start over from scrap again. You got a lot of experience on this team. You got a lot of talent on this team. So my early thoughts is that if I had to tell you guys which team needs to win this game more, who has more pressure on them going into this matchup, I got to go Florida State. Like I said, FSU, it's been a while since they've been talked about in this kind of way. Nobody has talked about Florida State being a potential college football playoff contender in years. Nobody has had this level of optimism for the Florida State football program in a very long time. And if they were to lose to LSU, I think that a lot of those great things that have been said about FSU would be taken back by a lot of people. And then people will start looking at Mike Norvell and start saying, oh, Mike Norvell isn't the guy who can win the big games. Because what was the knock on FSU last year? Yes, they won 10 games, but who did they beat? They didn't play nobody that tough. So if they can't beat LSU, the narrative probably is going to be that Mike Norvell just struggles in big games. Even though they beat LSU last year, some people could say maybe that was a fluke win. And if they lose to Clemson, I think it makes Mike Norvell look a little bit worse when it comes to his public perception. Because then you're going to be 0-2 in your two biggest games of the years, and you're going to be out of the playoff conversation after everybody had these high playoff expectations for you this year. I think expectations are really high for FSU, and the expectations are why FSU has to win this game. They got to prove to everybody that this team is legit and that the Seminoles are back. And with a loss, I just don't know if I personally have that same level of optimism about Florida State. So you guys let me know how you guys are feeling about LSU versus FSU with this game only a few weeks away. I'm very excited to see this matchup. We got two of the best quarterbacks in college football going head to head. We got two coaches who have their programs on the rise. And I know I'm going to get some pushback from Florida State fans, but I strongly believe that this is a must-win game for Mike Norvell and the Seminoles in terms of the momentum that they have built up going into this year and all of their expectations. And if they can prove that they're good enough to beat LSU and they can beat Clemson, I don't see no reason why this team couldn't be good enough to potentially compete for a national championship. But these are their two biggest tests this year. This game here against LSU and against Clemson. And for LSU, like I said, I don't really think there's that much pressure on them in this situation. I really don't. You're playing in the SEC. You still have everything ahead of you. And I think that many people have a lot of confidence in Brian Kelly. And the fact that some people may say, well, last year kind of was unexpected. It was lightning in a bottle. Of course, they were going to come back to reality this year. Okay, I don't think LSU fans would to hear that, but it'll be something that I would be okay with. I mean, the SEC is tough. The ACC kind of has been a cakewalk for the last couple of years. So for LSU, if they end up having a season where they only win 8-9 games, I don't really think too much is going to change. I still think everybody's going to be pretty optimistic about their outlook for the future. FSU, though, I don't know, man. People were already writing off Mike Norvell around this time last year, and this game kind of changed everything when FSU was able to pull off the upset. But FSU, though, I think they just have so much to lose in this game, man. Think about the year they had last season, the run they went on late last year. The momentum that they have going into this season is so crazy. I've been gassing up FSU all off season long. And I know you FSU fans are excited about the thought of potentially winning the ACC. And even if you lose this game and you lose to Clemson, I mean, you could still win the ACC. But come on, man, you mean to tell me that you don't expect this team to be able to compete for a spot in the college football playoffs? I know it's way too early to be talking about it, but this is one of those games that just has those early season implications when it comes to that. And when it comes to how we view FSU as a contender, this is going to be the game where they're going against another team that's in the same conversation that they're in, kind of in a similar predicament. And if they can't get the job done, that kind of tells us that this team was fool's gold. So these are my early thoughts on LSU versus FSU. Who do you guys think is going to win this game? Let me know down in the comment section down below.